Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of COVID Chats. My guest today is Benjamin Bass. Ben was my roommate for the second half of senior year at Rutgers University. He was previously the president of Hillel on campus and was an economics major who graduated with magna cum laude honors. Currently, he serves in the Israel Defense Force in the Tank Corps. We had an excellent discussion about the current coronavirus situation in Israel, and Ben, as per usual, had a lot to say. Without further ado, here is episode 3. Benjamin Bass, welcome to episode 3 of COVID Chats. Excellent to have you on.
It's amazing that you gave me an opportunity to talk about myself. I love every opportunity like that, and thank you for giving me the chance to speak.
Of course. I'm
A little
concerned
bit
about
about
you.
me.
Yeah.
Ruben and I were good friends in college, but terrible roommates together. And I moved to Israel to join the army, and I currently live on Kibbutz Erez, which is a small socialist farming cooperative that also has a plastics factory in southern Israel, less than a kilometer from the Gaza Strip. So, yeah,
Okay.
I think it could help things out. I'm currently in the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli Army, and I was at language school, and now I'm waiting for my next assignment. I'm recommended to go to the Tank Corps, but it's unclear how the virus is going to affect things.
Right. Right. That's part of the reason I want to talk to you. I think it's very interesting that you're in Israel. You're away from your family, and this is it's a new experience for you, what you're doing. And now that the virus has become so prevalent, really globally, that sort of throws a wrench into it. So I think you're in an interesting position. So I'm wondering, question one, when did things start getting serious in Israel vis-a-vis the coronavirus, and how did the army and your officers respond to it?
So it's a little bit longer of a story. Some of you may know that Israelis tend to travel to the Far East, to Thailand and Cambodia and Laos and India and all these places after their army trip. Their army service is called the Big Trip in Hebrew. And so Israelis are very in tune to the Far East. So in January, there were rumors of a new disease that occurred in China, but people kind of ignored them. Like the first thing that really hit in Israel was the Diamond Princess cruise ship, which some people may have heard about. And there were, I think, 7 Israelis that were on that ship. And so people started following that very closely. And then flights started getting canceled. So any soldiers flying to the Far East, that any flight was canceled. And there were whispers of things getting a little bit more serious. But prior to the last week in February, the first week in March, Israelis weren't really taking this seriously. Statistically speaking, it's not that dangerous unless the health system is overwhelmed and the curve isn't flat. And then the real trauma occurred when things started happening in Italy, and I think I can safely say the sheer incompetence of their political leadership and their healthcare system started surprising Israelis a lot. Even though Israel's in the Middle East, it's still a $30 flight from Rome.
Right.
So that's pretty much next door. It's, for an American, it'd be like, oh, I live in New York City and something's happening in Washington, D.C. So It was very close. And politically speaking, no politician wants to have 1,000 dead. Now it's 3,500 dead in a country the size of Israel, because things travel quickly, and Israel is a very internet-connected country. And so I think this is something that I have to touch on. Israel is a vibrant democracy, although like any democracy, quite flawed. And this is the 3rd election in less than a year. We'll probably have a 4th election. And so for political reasons, Bibi Netanyahu has really ratcheted up the response to the coronavirus. Although I am not fond of Bibi politically, I think he's doing a much better job than almost all Western leaders that I've seen at this point, and especially being so close to Italy and what's really happening there. Something to take into account, for me personally, the first real effect was I was having the closing ceremony for my language school in the Army. And so the closing ceremony was happening. There's people from all over the world that were coming in. People that I know who have parents from Europe had already started closing their flights, and I laughed at them in the face, and I was like, you're from Germany, like this isn't really that serious. And then the closing ceremony was actually closed to all foreigners. And it was really upsetting. My mom had flown in, and the ceremony was just like, we like paraded around in green uniforms for the fifth time in a row, because we'd already rehearsed it, and that was quite frustrating. But because I saw my mom, I actually got excused from the Army for 2 weeks, which was definitely an amazing thing to happen. And something else that's funny, and it's also a little Army related. Some of my friends had a big party in Tel Aviv. I couldn't go because it was my mom, but almost everyone who was supposed to report back to base to guard it for 2 weeks before we were assigned to our new units, the combat units that most of us were going to, were at this party at Lima Lima. And I woke up Friday morning to messages from my commanders saying, if you were at this party, send us a picture that you were there or with a foreigner to prove it, and then you will not be going back to base. So they were punished for partying, which was quite hilarious. And I have many friends that are that have parents that work abroad. Israelis are a very international people. So at any given time, there are about 200,000 Israeli residents, not just citizens, that are traveling abroad. And so they've put in place a 14-day isolation. And so anytime someone comes into the country, you have to be in bidud, isolation, for 14 days in a room. And there are probably like at least 500,000 to 1 million people that are in isolation at this time.
Wow. So what was the timeline on that? When did people's big trips start getting canceled? And what was the date on your ceremony when your mom visited?
Okay, so on March 4th, the first week in March. So like the first week in March, people were like, okay, this is coming. Right. Israel freaking out. We're like, oh, this is like getting a little out of hand. And then like things started getting really bad in Italy. So on March 4th, ceremony to people who are abroad and coming from abroad, and they started having people the first week of March saying you can't go. They started canceling any military personnel for personal reasons or for military reasons wasn't going abroad, starting the first week of March, starting March 4th, March 5th. Then on then March 6th, March 5th, March 6th, people started going into lockdown, getting a little serious. People were like, okay, there's going to be a formal response. Anybody starting around March 9th, when my mom was supposed to be here, she left actually a day early because of rumors that Israel was closing the airport. We were with someone who works security. He's one of the top security officials at Ben Gurion Airport, and he said that things are getting a little tense. So that was last week. And then over last Shabbat, which was March 12th, 11th, 12th, things like shut down. So normally the Army doesn't put out any messages during Shabbat. Israel shuts down on Shabbat, but the word came out that any soldier returning to base had to stay for 28 days. And they were shutting down public transportation. I actually went to the food store on after Shabbat to get some stuff because I was staying at my kibbutz for another week. And people were buying food for Passover. Right. And those who know the Jewish calendar, this is a month away, and that's how Israel is pretty much shutting down right now. Right. And progressively throughout the week, more and more restrictions are coming. So public transportation starting 2 days ago at night was shut down tonight, and the order came out so that there will be no public transportation starting tonight from 8 p.m. So 30 minutes ago, Israel time, until Sunday morning. The entire country is pretty much shut down. I had to travel to the center of Israel for a meeting with the Army this week to get my new position. And I went through Tel Aviv, through Ezrieli. For those who know Israel, Ezrieli is an area that's next to the equivalent of the Israeli Pentagon and a major train station and a bus station. So I got off the bus and I had to walk through this main mall to the train, and no one was there. And this would be like walking through Penn Station at rush hour and seeing no one. So things are really starting to shut down. And I'm thinking that this Sunday, maybe Monday, they'll probably shut down all public transportation by Wednesday this week.
Hmm.
That's the m- mild prediction. Something that I want to add
Yeah.
that is different as an American who's also in Israel. In America, people really value it's all about the individual, and then the community and the state and the federal government comes next. In Israel, the society has been built in a way where it's the state, the community, and then your individual. So the
Mm.
government has a lot more leeway to do certain things, and they have an impressive security apparatus. And it's weird living in a democracy but also finding out one morning that the government is now monitoring people who have been flagged for corona concerns
Right.
using their impressive state security apparatus. And
Right.
although there is a challenge in the Supreme Court, this is still going to happen.
Right.
And it's kind of surprising hearing about this, but again, like I said, it's America and Israel are built differently. Israel
Right.
is a state that happens to have democracy and value personal freedom, but it's not a democracy at its core that values individual rights. It's
Right.
one that happens to offer them. Whereas in America, it's all about the individual, and you can really see that there's not really the top-down leadership or coordinated effort to combat the coronavirus. Yeah.
Do you think Israeli society is better built to handle the coronavirus in light of that, in light of the community and state level first, as opposed to the individual?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, it's kind of hard to get Israelis on board with things.
Right.
So unless it's like a serious, like living in the Israeli society, I've already been here. Did it cut out yet? I've already been here when on my kibbutz where people have launched numerous rockets and there have been terrorist infiltrators. So like, unless Israelis know how threats work and they respond accordingly to a threat, but I think it's taken a little bit to convince the average Israeli that this isn't a big deal. That this is a big deal for a while because it's an invisible threat. They recognize when people are shooting at them or stabbing them or driving into them, or blowing themselves up. But now that Israelis are finally recognizing this, the public transportation ban and stuff like that, things are by next week. It's going to be almost like a shelter in place without the order. One of the biggest things that is actually stopping this is, and I know that in America, all religious institutions have closed, but because of the large ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, there's been a big backlash against closing religious institutions. But outside of that, mainstream Israeli society and the Israeli Arab sector as well, which is another 25% of the population, have really hunkered down.
So, because you saw your mom for the ceremony, around the time of the ceremony, that meant that you had to spend 14 days away from the army, away from base. Is that correct?
So they just didn't want me to return to the base that I was currently serving at.
Okay.
The army doesn't really elaborate, and they pretty much paid for me to have a 14-day vacation.
Right.
So they didn't request for me to be specifically in isolation, but yeah.
And you're still on that vacation, correct?
I'm still on that vacation until Sunday.
And
It's
what's the
unclear
word? Yeah. What's the word after the? Have you gotten an update about what's going on past Sunday, or no, not yet?
I'm packing a bag for 28 days,
Gotcha.
which is normally in the Israeli army. It's not like the American army. It's a conscript army, and also it's a much smaller country. So people usually go away for a week, 11 days. They don't really spend a lot of time on base unless there's some punishments. And it's almost unheard of for someone who's drafting into a new unit and starting out their service to spend 28 days on base. So it's kind of surprising. And most people actually get the first weekend guaranteed off in the army for just like certain administrative purposes. Like the first week in the army in a new unit they're just like filling out paperwork and like, who is this person who showed up that I'm going to be legally responsible for, and like training. So it's complicated the situation a little bit. I packed the bag for 28 days. Don't really know what's going to happen.
Right. And that would be 28 days on base. That would be your assumption. Or 28 days where?
That's also the big question. So the Israeli army has it doesn't draft people every month. There are 3 drafting periods during the entire year: November to December, March to April, July to August. And so they have 3 training cycles that go through the year, and it's the beginning of the March cycle, or this week. And so I actually didn't receive the order to show up on the draft day for Shirion, the tank corps that I'm joining, but I received an order to show up a day earlier at a different base. So with a lot of other people that are drafting to a lot of diverse places in the Army.
Mm.
So I don't really know.
Right. Well, right. And you might not know for a little bit, right? This might be, things can change at any moment. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, moving forward to a little bit more of the personal question. So what's it like going through this for you so far from home and family and New Jersey, you know, everything you've known from a young age?
Personally, I chose to move away from my family, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to see them for long periods of time.
Right.
And uh, it's not as challenging as you would expect. Because of the break that I was granted, I actually have more time to speak to my family on the phone.
Right.
Everyone's working from home. All of my friends that graduated college are now working from home. So I can pretty much call or talk to anybody I want whenever I want for as long as I want, and it's not really a concern. So it's been actually beneficial for my relationships with my family.
Interesting.
But it's not what you'd expect. But it's in many ways, it's also like challenging for people that I know that have family in America and were planning to go, because it's like they want to go to America, but on the one hand, they'll probably America's in a much worse situation than Israel,
Absolutely.
as I previously described.
Yes.
And yeah, it's like it's hard not being with my family, but like I knew I wasn't going to be with them. It was kind of sad losing a day to spend with my mom.
Right.
But outside of that, I think that I've spoken to my grandparents more this week than I have since I've drafted, because I literally went for an adventure out into the fields outside my kibbutz for 3.5 hours today, and walked all over the place, and I just have a lot of free time. And
right. Are a lot of people wearing masks? Like when you go out, were you wearing a mask? Were other people wearing masks? Gloves?
So this is a great question. So as a lone soldier with not really family in Israel, when you do have money to spend, you're not going to spend it on a mask, because like the worst thing that happens is like you get sick, you're trapped in your room, the Army pays you for 2 weeks. So like, and you'd rather spend your money on food and alcohol. So I'm not wearing a mask, but my host family on the kibbutz, after going on public transportation, has ostracized me. And the soldiers that are on the kibbutz are pretty much in like self-quarantine from the rest of the community, and we're not allowed to engage with them.
The Army isn't issuing masks, though? There's no masks for soldiers, nothing like that?
There's not enough.
Okay. Shortage.
There's just a flat-out shortage.
Right.
And the real concern is that younger people would be spreading it, but the majority of the soldiers that are in the Army right now are essential personnel, and they're all on closed military bases. And even if you have corona in the Army, these people aren't leaving the Army for 28 days. Pretty much, they're all staying. It's pretty much like they're on war footing in many ways. And so the Army isn't concerned. It's more about stopping for like their own soldiers, it's more about stopping the spread. Because statistically speaking, this only kills old people and those who have compromised immune systems. And compromised immune systems at the age of 18 to 25, these people aren't serving the Army anyway.
Right.
So it's more about the massive elderly population in Israel, because Israel does have one of the highest life expectancies in the world. And so, yeah.
So are there any skills you have gained in the Army so far that you can use to protect yourself during this pandemic?
No, you learn a lot of different things in the Army, but global pandemic, one thing is that I definitely could apply from the Army is, and also living in Israel and being in tenser security situations, and in a sense, living history, because we're definitely going to be telling our children about this. Like when you read history, you see these intense events, and you think it all happens at once. And there's definitely a large sense of anxiety and just sitting around and waiting for things to happen. So like there was a day where there are probably 150 rockets launched at me, like at my kibbutz and in the general area, but people don't realize that like with all these security concerns and all these things, like even if they're launching, let's say like 10 rockets and like all these things specifically to your kibbutz, there's still a lot of just waiting.
Right.
And you're living something meaningful and something definitely life-threatening, and but there's just a lot of downtime, and that's, I think, the hardest thing for a coronavirus experience or a global pandemic or an event like this. You're just sitting around.
Right.
There's nothing to do. Like, you can only watch the news and read and talk to so many people for so much. And
Right.
I think that's the most challenging thing for a lot of people. It's about being comfortable with just boredom
Right.
and the waiting, and waiting and waiting.
Right. And
I
it's,
just
yeah.
I just recounted like all the things that have happened in Israel, and there's over 500 people sick with coronavirus, but this has taken weeks to happen, and all these restrictions aren't happening at once, and even then, yeah, yeah. So that's like, I think that's probably the most important thing. Like, even like today, I was in probably not the nicest area to be for security purposes, but if I was there during a tense time, I could definitely be killed. But today it's a nice day, and there's just a lot of downtime, and it's hard for people to get used to that. And
Mm.
it's like hurry up and wait. So you hear there's these big developments, and then you just sit around.
Mm. I'm curious, what's it like? Is there any news regarding sort of the Palestinian populations and the care over there? Are there cases in
Yeah.
settlements and or in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank? I mean, what's that like?
The Gaza Strip is under a security blockade since from Israel and
Right.
Egypt. Since 2007, there's been
Right.
things going on and off. And I know, and then the West Bank is a little bit more complex. There are pretty much Palestinian neighborhoods that have been cut off, they're not neighborhoods, they're massive Palestinian controlled areas that are almost independent islands within the West Bank. And
Right.
because of this, I'm going to get back to the Gaza Strip and other reasons later, but I know for a fact that there are cases in Bethlehem and Jericho, because those are massive European tourist places, but they have pretty much been closed entirely. I think there's between 39 and 50 cases in both those areas, and they've been like hardcore shelter in place. The Palestinian Authority, which has a total control over these areas, has put like ruled with an iron fist, and there's no non-essential employee flow anywhere in Israel, in Gaza, and the West Bank. Anywhere there's no flow between any like separate territorial identities. Settlement-wise, Israel doesn't really distinguish between Israel proper and over the Green Line, so I can't speak to that. I can also add that I have friends that are working in foreign relations in the Israeli army, and that I know that there's a lot of medical aid that Israel gives to Palestinians in the West Bank, the Gazans, and then even Jordanians. And I know for a fact that pretty much all non-corona related medical aid has stopped. So there's a story, definitely not in the news. It's someone that I just know that was working there. This kid had cancer. He needed to go for a certain procedure in Israel. It was stopped. I dislocated my shoulder. I live in Israel. I'm in the army. I'm pretty much not getting any healthcare for that because it's only corona related things.
Right. Right.
And so it's a shame to say that like it's a general blanket thing that's affecting all populations in this area, in and around, and kind of depending on Israeli control. It's affecting the Jewish people here. It's affecting the Arabs. It's affecting people who identify as Palestinians. It's affecting the Jordanians. It's affecting everyone. That everything, like healthcare wise and freedom of movement for all populations, is non-existent right now.
Right.
Which is something to consider.
Definitely.
And I think just like knowing how things work, I think Gaza is going to be remarkably well isolated from what happens with the coronavirus. And when I think this crisis and the quarantine and the global lockdown is going to last for a couple of months, and it's going to be a massive economic disaster, we don't know yet what will happen with the coronavirus in the summer. But when the restrictions maybe ease a little bit, there's definitely concern with what will happen in Gaza, because they do not have any healthcare facilities. All of their healthcare is pretty much provided by Israel, and so it'll be interesting. But in the West Bank, they've locked everything down, and they have much better quality healthcare, and they're in a much better situation than Israel at this point because of the way that it's structured politically and territorially.
Right, because of their isolation in this regard, they're actually perhaps a little bit in
Yeah,
the advantage.
Gaza's in the best place, but
Right,
they
certainly.
like isolation, but like they don't have any healthcare facilities that I would say that are equipped to handle this.
Mm,
Whereas in the West Bank, they do, and they're a competent government, the Palestinian Authority. Although many people have qualms with what they do, they are a
sure.
competent government, and they're not a registered terrorist organization, and they provide certain human service, like health and human services things. So,
Right. So, besides the boredom that you're facing, is there any other ways that the coronavirus has personally affected you? Do you know anybody in the
yeah.
army or any of your friends who have been affected? How else is it playing a role on you?
So I know people in Israel. I know a lot of people in Israel who have been in quarantine. Um, my father was in a hotspot in New Rochelle, New York. He was at a synagogue there,
Right.
and he went to go get tested. We're part. We have as I'm my family is fortunate in America to have excellent quality health care, and we can
Right.
afford to pay for our health care. And he went to go. He drove up to get tested at our health group, and they don't have any testing kits.
Right.
I have someone that I know very well who's one of my father's best friends from college. I call him my uncle. There was a family party, and one of his mother was there, and she didn't feel so well. She went to go get tested. They kicked her out of the hospital. She went back to get tested. They kicked her out of the hospital,
Wow.
and then that was last Saturday and Sunday. And then right now she's in the ICU, and the rest of her family is in Bidud, and she has the coronavirus, and
Wow.
she's in the risk group because she's over 80.
Sure.
So that's definitely challenging.
Mm.
4 people in my town have coronavirus, so it's definitely spreading. And my grandparents pretty much haven't left their house since Saturday, since this news struck. Our family's dropping them off food, and we're like, we're not even going to see you because we're not at risk. But if we saw them, they would be at risk. And so I think it's definitely, it's really affecting people.
Right.
And there are not. This is like the sheer incompetence of the American healthcare system and the American political system uh, is
You got a little
it's
cut off
really
there.
just like it's sad because it's the sheer incompetence
Yeah.
of what I see that's going on in America, bipartisan incompetence, and the lack of a real healthcare system that can provide for people, unless it's specialized medicine. I just know that like a lot of Americans are going to die from this.
Yeah.
And economically speaking, I studied economics, and I just know that there's a monetary response, which already happened from the Federal Reserve, and then there's
Right.
a fiscal response. And this isn't going to help because people are just not going to feel comfortable leaving their homes for the next
Right.
couple of months.
Right.
So
what's
I'm not
it
very
like?
optimistic.
You're not very optimistic.
No.
No. Right. Well, I think that's fair. So what's it like on the kibbutz? Are there special instructions going out? I know that your host
Yeah.
family who adopted you while you were there has asked you not to come. So I'm wondering what's it like on the kibbutz?
So all the soldiers, I live with a community of lone soldiers, so we have adopted families. Because we have a habit of traveling the length of the country on a weekly basis and everywhere, public transportation, we go everywhere in the country. We're not really allowed to see our host families, period. I know that there's a dining hall in the kibbutz. The dining hall does a takeout service. You have to submit your order at the beginning of the day, and then you can come and pick it up. We had a massive Purim party planned that was canceled. The playground there's only one playground. The kibbutz is a communal space, and they made a very big point about having one playground. That's closed. You can't go to it. You can't use the basketball courts. Like all communal spaces on the kibbutz are closed. Period. Which is a big deal when people build their lives at the kibbutz, knowing that they'll always be able to use the playground, or knowing that they'll be able to like everyone has. They know they're going to have these communal services, and they're looking for that communal experience. So it's been quite challenging, I think, for the kibbutz to manage with the situation. And also like as a kibbutz isn't built for people to be in bidud. I'm living in quite a big place. I share it with another person, and we just don't have a kitchen because we live in a kibbutz in a Mediterranean country, in a place in a Mediterranean country where I can just always walk to the kitchen that I want to use.
Right.
So like it's very challenging to be part of a communal place that was built for a community
Right.
and not be able to interact with certain people. And it's weird. It's sad.
Right. Yeah, a place that's built on community, and now you can't really access that community.
Yeah.
Okay, well, last question for you, and then I'll let you go. So Israel is known to be a high-tech place with great medical care. What have you heard over there in terms of the care for patients with COVID-19, or in terms of a vaccine? Because I know, especially in the early days of this virus, there was a lot of talk about Israel being on the forefront of developing a vaccine. I'm wondering if you've heard anything maybe from the army or personally from the news or kibbutzniks.
Yeah. I haven't heard anything about the vaccine. I think that would be the same timetable for globally the vaccine, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a year to 18 months.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, which is not optimistic. But I do know that Israel has a first-rate healthcare system, socialized medicine. It's been weird coming from America to socialized medicine, where like the doctors actually care about you, and so they have a top-of-the-line medical system. The identification of people with coronavirus has been much better than in America. Initially, there was a push for self-isolation because there weren't enough testing kits. The testing kits are finally here. Currently, Israel has over 560 people with coronavirus, and thank God, no died, which is statistically very unlikely. Healthcare-wise, Israel is finally taking over certain hotels in Tel Aviv, massive hotels that have 1,000 beds, and making them into quarantine facilities. Oh, did you cut out? They're
I
making them into
cut out for a second, but it's okay. Yeah.
So currently Israel is converting a lot of hotels in Tel Aviv and throughout the country into quarantine facilities because they're empty because of the lack of tourists, and they're filling them with people that need to be monitored in different levels, in different capacities, and they're working very hard to flatten the curve, as everyone's saying.
Right.
And I'm sure people are working on the vaccine. That's above my pay grade and my scope of knowledge, but the actual response to like the coronavirus is been very swift and very thorough to all aspects of society in a way that I know that's not happening in America. And it's not Wuhan, China bad, where China pretty much put everyone on lockdown. It's slowly moving to a much more relaxed, it's like a relaxed quarantine in many ways, but there's going to be a societal quarantine. And the healthcare system has been reacting remarkably well. Like I said, there's 560 something people that have corona confirmed cases. There's definitely more. Only 5 of them are actually in ICUs at this point, and everyone else is getting the care that they need, which is not the case in most countries at this point. So it's they've responded remarkably well.
Right. It's definitely a good place to be for healthcare, in terms of this.
For healthcare, politically speaking, there's going to be a unity government or something along those lines to protect the rights of all citizens and provide them with the healthcare that they need. And so, yeah. And I have to also, there's a moment today where we're supposed to thank all of the healthcare providers. So I have to say a nice thank you to all the Israel healthcare providers.
Yes, a big thank you to them. A big thank you to all healthcare workers in this trying time. I mean, they're working very hard, and they're exposing themselves regularly to the virus. So they're really doing an incredible job. They are the superheroes of our time.
Yeah.
One last thing. I know I said the last question would be the last one, but do you think there's any chance that the Army is going to ask you or fellow soldiers to help out with this in terms of building beds or monitoring areas? Is there any thoughts about that? Any word from that, or not yet?
Not yet. But they are they try to keep, the Army is a massive organization in Israel. There's 500,000 people in the Army, reserves and non-reserves. So I'm the bottom of I'm like the least useful at this time. So I'll probably be sent to my training base to help out there and start my training. But they are calling in reserves, and Israel has a complex healthcare system in relationship with the Army. So a lot of people the way that doctors work in Israel is a lot of them become doctors through the Army. They serve in the Army, or they become doctors through university, and then they have reserve service, and the Army can mandate what they want. And the Army is intimately involved in all manners of like all aspects of life in Israel. So you go to a hospital and like or you go to a hospital, a civilian hospital, and you could be seeing an Army doctor who's just off duty in the Army. And
Sure.
you go. I had to go to the hospital for my shoulder. I went to an Army hospital. It was a civilian who treated me. Then I went to another Army hospital. Civilian treated me, but I was in an Army facility. And then I had to go to a civilian hospital. And no, it was there was a. I went to one hospital and the X-ray technician wasn't there, so I had to go to a different one. It wasn't like indictment of the quality of care. And
Right.
so like
Right.
it's just like the guy left and it wasn't standard hours. So it's intimately involved and they're calling it reserves. I know that you have an uncle, I believe, or a cousin.
An uncle, yes, he's in Tel Aviv.
And well, no, you have a relative who lives on Ina Shofet and he was in the search and
yes.
rescue.
Yes, my cousin,
like,
yes.
Okay, cousin. So they like people like that are starting to slowly be called up to help facilitate quarantine stuff. But the standard Army is operating as usual. I also have to add, this has just crossed my mind because it happened today. I think that the message from the leadership of the country has been a lot more positive than in some countries I've seen. And the elbow handshake has awkwardly become common everywhere, even if there aren't interactions with people. And even from the president, which kind of acts as a figurehead in Israel, he's doing their fireside chats. He's doing reading children's books to kids because he usually meets stuff, and it's very funny to like you laugh about it when you see it. But the leadership of the country has been much more upfront about fighting the coronavirus, and that is also very beneficial. Some would say for political reasons. I also think so, but they are also yielding results.
Right. We have to put the politics aside a little bit in a time like this and assume that most people are doing the right thing for the sake of it being the right thing and not necessarily for re-election purposes. But,
there was after that there was like a big press conference on Purim, which is the Jewish party holiday, and like the politicians were there, like all of them that were required to be there, and they were quite vocal. And like yes, they were like hot saying a doctor, but like they also chose to come on a day where Jews traditionally drink themselves into a stupor. So there's definitely a active sense of concern in Israel at this time.
Well, I think an active sense of concern is pretty responsible in a time like this, right?
Yeah.
Well, Benjamin, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. I surely appreciate it. It's great to hear you and your voice and your story. I hope that you consider buying a mask if it is available or becomes available, because I think it's something that you should be wearing if you're going outside and frolicking in the field for hours at a time. Really, thank you for all the information. I appreciate it, and it's great to see your face, of course.
It's always great to talk to you, Ruben. And if you ever want to have me talk about myself and my life for 45 minutes at another time, please let me know. I'm more than happy to do that.
Absolutely.
Stay healthy.
Thank you. You too. But stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.